you so very much. I'm so glad to have you all here because apparently it's very good to have all your expertise bundled right now. Because I would ask you for a favor for this session. I found out about a concept about forms the past few weeks. I was learning this approach. I was trying to improve this even more. And yeah, maybe you can just share then your thoughts after the talk with me. And I now want just to also make the confession that I basically love forms. I build a lot of forms, I fill a lot of forms out, and I also like if a form is helping me filling out the right information in order to make the process fast, in order to processing this information. And I know, depending on your business cases, forms are sometimes very easy to do, and sometimes it's very hard to do. And that's why I want to dive with you into the evolution of forms in AngularJS and Angular, just very briefly. And then I want to introduce you to a concept that I call schema-driven forms, that has the goal to improve the developer experience building forms with Angular, and also to make building forms fast and easy to understand. And finally, we just sum up the takeaways, the key learnings out of this journey. And I hope afterwards to speak with a lot of you about this approach. So as we all learned, AngularJS is around since 2010, and there we just had template-driven forms with the ng model and ng model group directive. And apparently, template-driven forms were kind of nice and a lot of fun. We had this ng model attribute. We were able to have this cool two-way binding to synchronize the form state with our code that it was working behind. Unless you have to do validations, right? So I'm not sure who of you had used template-driven forms with required attribute and min value, max value, and so on. And afterwards, you always have to handle when to display which form validation error. This was kind of clunky, right? And this is one of the main reasons why so many people might dislike template-driven forms. And like Martina just asked me if I am the template-driven or the reactive form guy, I will just want to forward this question to you. Can you raise your hand? Who is using reactive forms in the project? That's really cool, because now I haven't to ask about the template-driven forms anymore, because most of you are using reactive forms. Yeah, so the main reason I think most of companies or projects are not using template-driven forms is the fragmented or scattered setup, that we have validations in the template. We also need to react to events of form changes then in the TypeScript code. And the templates also got too big, not really maintainable, and not really readable anymore. And also one thing that we had is handling like control arrays was not that easy, because template-driven forms have no built-in concept in order to use arrays or iterables. They are using records for that. And that's why when Angular was released in 2016, we got reactive forms, right? And reactive forms kind of introduced a more convenient way to set up and build forms with form group or the form builder abstraction, for example. And it also seemed to integrate better with the observable streams from RxJS. Although template-driven forms and ngForm also have the same API, right? But we kind of lost track of that on the run. And obviously, the reactive forms also introduced the form array, so it was more convenient to handle lists. And these are my favorite three topics when I think, yeah, reactive forms are favorited by teams to use. But when we did the switch from template-driven forms to reactive forms, I think we forgot to talk about the trade-offs that we made. Actually, template-driven forms had a very nice and cool feature, namely that they have a very declarative API, and template-driven forms build and the form is processed, the form group and the form controls automatically for us, so we did not have to take care about that. Currently, with reactive forms, we need to manually build this structure, and then we also bind the validations to this. And yeah, this is not as good as I think that we derive the whole structure of the form value from the template itself. And even more, if controls are not used anymore, template-driven forms just withdraw those controls and remove them entirely from the structure. And I think this is something that we kind of forgot to discuss when we thought about either template-driven forms or reactive forms. And maybe you now know in what direction I want to go here. So, like thinking, what if we could combine the best of two worlds together again, like having the best of template-driven forms and the best of reactive forms? And here I was thinking about what is the hardest part of template-driven forms that I want to simplify. And this was somehow the coupling of building and creating the form and do the validations. I kind of think that we have other possibilities and other solutions out there that are better at validating data and giving us a nicer experience. And that's why I thought, okay, let's decouple the creation and updating of the form state from the validations entirely, and let's do the validations with the help of a schema. And that's why I came up with this title of schema-driven forms. And let me just show you briefly the overview of this architecture. Basically, in the component, if we want to build a form, we just provide two things. The first thing is the model. And the model contains the form state, like only the form value, and is updated accordingly to the changes that the user types into his form. And secondly, there is the schema. And the schema is like executed by a little helper that helps us to see if the form is invalid or not, and then we provide some information for the ng form in order to display the errors automatically, so that we do not have to do this manual if control has error thing and then render error messages to the user. The cool thing about this is we do not have to relearn anything right now. We can just use ng form as we already do. We pass or bind the model to our ng form, to our ng model, to our ng model group, and those attributes or those directives communicate with the ng form and do their value changes and status updates. But no validations anymore. Just what ng form can do best, creating the model structure internally and updating the information. And then we introduce a second player here, like a second directive, a form schema directive, if you like, which subscribes to all the value changes. And whenever ng form or a form group provides new values, the schema processes those values and executes validations. And what we get from those validations are just a list of errors. And since we tear apart the validation from the form, we kind of need to help ng form again to know about the error state, right? And that's why the form schema directive kind of communicates to the ng model or ng model group, hey, by the way, you are invalid. But this is just internal knowledge. You won't see this in the API surface. This is done automatically behind the scenes. And the second thing is that we can introduce more convenient APIs for our components to be used. One thing is like, of course, the form updated event so that we can synchronize our model in the component. And the other thing is like we could think of like a form safe submit, which is only executed when the schema evaluates the value to be valid. And this makes our code and the component far more easy because we do not have to recheck the model. We do not have to do any mappings anymore. Everything what we get out of the schema is completely valid, and we can just process it, sending it to an API or whatever we like. And this approach introduces, again, a unidirectional data flow into our components. We bind our model to the ng form. The ng form does the value changes. The form schema executes the validations, and we get just our data back. There is no banana-in-the-box ng model anymore, because we just do not need it, because the form schema value changes will provide us with all the information we need. OK, so schema seems to be an idea, but how do we build a schema, right? There are multiple libraries, good libraries, just tailored for validation. And like Zod is very popular. And I was reading about another library called Volleybot. Volleybot is written by Fabian Hiller, and he introduced a very modular API, and the most type-safe API I've ever seen in a library. It's open source. It has nothing to do with Angular at all. If you have other projects like Vue or Quick or something like this, you can also use Volleybot there. And maybe I'm also a little bit biased, because if you have a look at the API of Volleybot, you see a very old friend that we know from RxJS, the pipe method. And literally, this is kind of the same concept. We are passing a value through a chain of operations. And after this chain of operations, we know if the value is valid or if it's invalid. And we can also provide custom error messages. We can transform the value. We can provide translations if we like to. Volleybot comes with a lot of features included. And basically, we start with a schema, and then we can run additional actions on it, like trimming or saying, is it an email, is it not an email, something like that. And this mental model matches perfectly with Angular forms as well. So this is like a schema for a registration form. And this registration form has a first name, a last name, an email, and inside of this email we have like the actual value and a verification of the email address. And all these primitive properties match perfectly to the ng model, right? We can just bind this. And if we see like a nested object, this is like an ng model group that we can use and bind. And let me just introduce you to a little demo here, so that you have an idea what the following code will be about. So let me introduce you to Toolazon. Maybe you are having this situation as well. You would just want to hang up a lamp or a picture, but you're missing a tool. You're missing a screw or a screwdriver, but you need this tool as fast as possible. Then Toolazon might be the solution for you. You can easily subscribe to Toolazon, and then you can pick tools from a list. And this list will be sent to a local distributor for tools, and then they will just come to your address and bring you the tools you need as quick as possible. And all of this form is written with a schema-driven approach and has this automatic validation on it. And if I just start typing here, I can resolve all the issues here. And as you can see in the email field, we also have validation for maybe like this. And here, lm.turing@uk.com. So like this, you can see that also related fields are somehow validated. So if the email address is not matching the origin, we have a custom message for this as well. And this is all derived from one central place from the schema. Yes, and then you can register, then you can pick up how many screws or saws. Maybe you want to chop some wood in the garden, maybe with 3 axes, or you need not paperclip, something like that, and then you can just say, okay, send all of this to my current location, and the next distributor will do this for you automatically. And this validating of related fields can be also done and achieved with a Volleybot. You can have like a schema with email and verification, and after you have validated all these fields, you can forward this to another validator, and the validator can like pick the fields that you want to validate, and then you can add like a custom condition to check if this is working. And if it's not working, then you can provide your own error message that is then displayed to the user. And all of this API is absolutely type safe. Even though that you see email and verification there written in as a string literal, if you have a typo there, the TypeScript compiler will note, okay, this is not a valid field that you want to validate, because all of this is derived from the object schema above, and which I think is pretty awesome. When we talk about validation, it's not just synchronous validation, we also somehow sometimes need to talk to an API, right? So like asking, is this email still available? Can the user take this email or not? And therefore, Volleybot has asynchronous validations, and you can like write your own custom validations and make API calls as you like. And then Volleybot is like executing this validation for you, and then the mental model is still the same. If the validation fails, you can provide your error message that is then displayed to the user. And those asynchronous validations, I think we want to use our Angular services for. This is no problem at all. We can just write our known Angular services. We can inject those services in our component, or at least in an injection context, and use a factory method to create our schema that is then working with our Angular service as well. So this is very, very easy. No, sorry. And finally, we need somehow a method to parse our schema. And there are also two ways in Volleybot. You can either use the parse method, where you can put in the schema and the actual value, and then all the validations are executed. Or you use save parse. The difference here is just that parse is throwing an error right away, and save parse is yielding an object, a result object to you, saying whether the validations are all okay, or you receive a list with issues with pointing you to the field which has an error. And you can also go even further. If you have the schema written, you can infer the actual type of the registration out of that schema that you can then use in your component. There is the method infer output, and if you run this against the schema, you will get your plain old JavaScript object, and then you can just really infer the object. So you do not have to need to manually do the typing more than just once. Okay, how is then the schema used, right? Let's have a look at this. And I think this is pretty convenient. We now just provide our model and our schema in our component, and then we bind this to our form. Form schema is just an implementation detail. I'm using a directive here, which then communicates with the ng form. And the model is also bound to a custom event that I introduced, like form updated, just to keep the value or the model in sync with the form. And you might have seen or noticed already that I use the inferred type, the registration type from the schema, but I also say that this is a partial deep, like every property in this registration type is optional. Why is that? Because I do not care about how the registration model is built, because template-driven forms is doing that for me. And because of the schema, I am sure that I only receive valid values. And that's why I can just work with an empty object here, and template-driven forms will just build the whole object graph for me internally. And since we have this value change or value updated event, we do not have to do this banana in the box syntax anymore. We just bind the value of the model via ng model, and then through the event, we get the sync back into our component model. And here you can see how the unidirectional data flow works between the template and the component again, which is, I think, pretty simple. We still have a little bit of time, and that's why I want you to know, because again, you are the judge in the end, what you think about this approach, right? I want just to show you briefly how the ng model gets to know about that it's invalid. I was writing a directive that has the same selector as ng model, so I am just enhancing the behavior of ng model. I'm not overriding it. No, I'm just looking. I just have a directive that also is interested in the ng model attribute, and then I inject the form schema directive, because this is a parent directive that I use, and then I listen for an error stream. And since I know the name and the path of the ng model, I can simply find out if there is an issue or an error in the list that I need to display. And I also was able to do a little bit of DX improvement as well. As you can see, I made this name attribute a required input so that I get direct feedback in my editor if I forget about the name attribute when I use template-driven forms. There is a runtime check, though, but I like to be informed as quick as possible if I do a mistake. OK. And now there is just a little last thing that we need to do, namely automatically displaying all the form errors in our template. And herefore, I just wrote a little directive as well. I call this the form field outlet. And inside of the form field outlet, you will just put your controls, your form controls. Can be an input, can be a date picker, whatever. And then the form field outlet uses content projection and also queries the ng model inside. And then the form field outlet knows about the state of the ng model, if it has an error or not. And if it has an error, it will automatically display the error in an HTML element. And you can do with it whatever you want. So you do not have to take care about displaying errors anymore. Everything now is standardized and done for you. Oh, OK, this is my favorite slide. So there's one more thing now. Who of you who had used template-driven forms before and used the name attribute made ever a typo in that? Yeah, and this is still annoying, right? So because this is an error that you do not really discover, because template-driven forms still automatically build the graph with the wrong property names, and then you end up with weird bugs. And then you're looking for them for minutes and hours, and then you can say, oh, OK, I just did a typo. But now we have the schema. And the schema knows about which controls are allowed to be there, and also knows about which controls should not be there. And as you can see here, I did a typo in my email control field. And once I run all the validations through my schema, I see, hey, there is an unknown field in it. And now I can use the information Valibot provides, and now I can produce a runtime error with a path to the field that is invalid. And this is, I think, a great improvement for us as developers to see directly, oh, OK, I messed something up accidentally. Yeah, how is the schema handled? You might say that we still have to mess with all the big template, right, when we have now template-driven forms. So I did not spoke about that really cool, but basically, this is absolutely up to you. You can split your forms still up in reusable parts by introducing your custom components and bind the model values to it. There's just one little neat trick that you need to do in order to be able to communicate with your parent ng form. And this is by providing a bridge in your view providers. This is also just an implementation detail. You will learn about this if you have a look in the code. But with this little trick, you are able to split your form up into multiple chunks as you like. And then you have readable and manageable templates again. Yeah. One last note maybe about this form array thing. It's still true. So template-driven forms do not use arrays internally. You cannot build an iterable structure inside a template-driven form. But I think this is not really a problem because ngModel is capable of producing records. And you use just dictionaries in template-driven forms. And once you know about that, it's pretty easy to get around this. So no worries, you're still able to use @for to build your control groups. You just need to know that your form then transforms this into a dictionary, which makes sense if you have big templates and big forms that are deeply nested. Then a lookup is always faster than iterating over a list. And here you can see just an example how you can do this. If you remember the shopping list is also a form in Toolazon. And here I provided this schema to say, hey, we have a record, and then we have a string which represents the ID of the product, and then we have an optional amount that we can bind to it. And this is then how the schema would look like for lists of controls. And here, at last, you see the template, so you can still load your products as a list from an API, iterate over them, and then you can just bind this to another child component in order to display it. And what you could do also, if you do not want to deal inside of your component with records, Volleybot has also this feature of transformations, so you could also process the dictionary of the form and then transform it back automatically into an array and use this and keep using this in your component, which I think is pretty awesome. So, but I'm not sure about you, but I think we kind of underestimated the capabilities of template-driven forms in the past few years. And I deeply apologize to template-driven forms at this point. With this schema-driven approach, I think we can produce much more readable code inside of our components. We have a fully type-safe solution for forms. So if you will have a look at the code base, you will see that also the form updated event is fully type-safe. There is no value changes anymore. It has really the type of the model or the type of the schema. And we are also, thanks to the schema, are able to build typo-safe forms, finally, and get runtime checks that help us to build correct forms. So if you are interested in the code base, you can check out the repository. You will also find the slides there. And yeah, let me know what you think. You can also just send an issue to this repository. I think maybe you also have ideas to improve this solution even further. And yes, I will. Thank you very much for your attention, and have fun with your forms in the future.